Do you want to make unforgettable characters that your table will talk about for years? I'll give you the tool I use to make my characters feel real, vital, nuanced, engaging, and most importantly, fun to play. Now, the first question is the big one. Why is your character participating in this story? The second question is smaller, but a lot more complicated. What is your character doing to get in their own way? Stick around and we'll dig into the answers. I'm Greg from Thunderleaf Games, and this is my quick tip for building great characters. I use this technique to build all of my characters, whether it's for a one-shot or a long-term campaign. By answering these two simple questions, you're going to give yourself an engaging, interesting character that's fun to play and fun to play with. Obviously, the more you know about the world that you're going to be playing in, the better you'll be able to answer these questions. So make sure you ask your game master for as much information as they're willing to give you about the setting that you're going to be playing in. That information is one more tool in your tool belt. Once you have some information about the world you're going to be playing in, it's time to ask yourself what kind of story you want to explore within that narrative. Now, this can be as broad or as narrow as you want it to be, as complicated or as simple. It's about what interests you in this character, in this story. For example, it could be as simple as, I want to play a power fantasy and be the hero. Maybe you want to explore a game with some political intrigue and backstabbing and maybe even a bit of light PvP. Maybe you want a story as focused as a cleric who's come face to face with their deity but lost faith. Any of those are fantastic starting points. They're fantastic stories to dig into and to explore at the table, and they give you some really powerful answers to the two questions. Now let's dig into the first question. Why is your character participating in this narrative? This is their capital W-Y for being here. This is their whole reason for engaging with their story. So this is a really important question for you to answer. If your character doesn't have a good reason for being a part of this story, then they're not going to be an engaging character to play, and you're not going to have fun. You're not going to feel connected to them. Now, when it comes to answering this question, I generally use two techniques: complementary or conflicting. With the complementary approach, your character's goals are going to be very much actively aligned with the goals of the party, with the narrative. One way I like to develop this is to make my characters part of an existing group, something like a militia or a fighters guild, or my favorite, an adventuring party, because when you do that, you get to have backstory with all the other characters, and that's always a good time. I really like using the complementary approach when group cohesion and overall narrative is more important to the table than individual character development or inter-party drama. If I want to play a less complicated character, I'm going to use the complementary approach. A less complicated character isn't necessarily a less interesting character. Their motivations are just a lot closer to the surface. Now, the other approach, conflicting, can make for some really exciting stories, some really juicy roleplay, and some really engaging moments at the table. But it comes with a big caveat. Your table has to be ready for this kind of gameplay. They have to trust each other enough to be able to roleplay inter-character and inter-party drama without that becoming interplayer drama. The last thing you want to do is make anybody uncomfortable at the table or ruin anybody's good time. Because at the end of the day, we're coming together to tell these stories to have fun. A character built using the conflicting approach is going to have the same basic goals as the party, but either for very different reasons or as part of a larger scheme. Very different reasons. Maybe the good aligned members of the party want to run the sheriff out of town because he's corrupt. but your conflicting character wants to run the sheriff out of town to make room for the drug cartel that they are indebted to move in. Everybody wants the sheriff out of town, but the conflicting character has very different reasons for wanting the same thing. So this is a fantastic conflict to build story around within your table, within your narrative. Another good example of a conflicting reason that a character might join the party is something like revenge, where the character wants the same thing the party wants, the end of the bad guy. But whereas the rest of the party wants to get this guy out, help people, and fix some of the damage, maybe the conflicting character really only wants to hurt or kill the bad guy and doesn't care about what it costs or what collateral damage they cause on the way there. Again, you've got that same primary goal, remove the bad guy, but very, very different motivations for that. So I really like playing with this kind of character at the right table, because you have to trust the role players and the people at your table, and they have to trust you. And you guys have to have established that rapport. That's the most essential aspect of playing a character with a conflicting motivation. All of that said, this does give your table a chance for some of the best roleplay opportunities you're going to be able to create for yourselves. And if you've got a table that can handle this, that likes this kind of roleplay, I say lean into it, because that's where some of the most memorable and impactful moments at the table have been for me. No matter which approach you choose, you really have to know and understand your character's motivations, their why for being here. If you don't have a deep and active understanding of that, then it's going to be really hard for you to roleplay your character engaging with the narrative effectively. So it's essential that you have this down pat when you're building your character out, when you're doing your character ideation. Now, for the second question, what is your character doing to get in their own way? And specifically in the way of the primary goals of the story or narrative your table is telling. For me, this is where the meat of the character really comes out. This is where they change from just an idea or a concept into someone I'm looking forward to role-playing. I think your character should have at least one of these flaws or stumbling blocks, because that's where the internal conflict comes in, those small battles that make character development so much more meaningful. So, for example, maybe you're playing a very greedy character and your party's engaged in building a criminal empire, but your greedy character can't help but skim a little bit off the top without telling anybody else. Or maybe your party is doing the work of a god who demands austerity, but your character develops a gambling problem. And it starts out just trinkets, but before long they're gambling for serious cash. This is where the real texture of the character comes in. It's where those little conflicts that make role-playing so interesting and so satisfying really come to the surface. And if you've got a table of role players who can all lean into this, you can get some really authentic feeling role play, some really deep and nuanced character interactions, specifically because of these flaws you build in. And that's why I think you should build at least one of these stumbling blocks into every character. Personally, I like to have at least 2 or 3 so that no matter what the situation is, I have a role-playing lever I can pull. All right, so now that you've answered the 2 questions, why is your character here and what are they doing to get in their own way? Check out how I implement this in our Cyberpunk Red Chapter 1 campaign. I had a lot of fun with all the characters I played in there, and I used this technique to build every single one of them. Thanks, Thunderleaf fam. Catch you next time.